Okay, so picture this. Doug Ford, Ontario's premier and professional pot stirrer, is standing at a podium talking about camels and tents and Chinese spy vehicles like he's pitching the world's weirdest action movie. Meanwhile, Mark Carney just got back from China with a trade deal that's got some people celebrating and others acting like he just sold Canada's soul for a discount on electric cars. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where we make sense of the political circus so you don't have to lose your mind trying. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the question that's splitting Canadian opinions faster than pineapple on pizza. Is Mark Carney's China EV deal brilliant diplomacy or a catastrophic mistake? Spoiler alert, the answer is way more complicated than a simple yes or no, but that's never stopped politicians from pretending it isn't. Let's break this down. Here's what happened. Carney went to China, did some negotiating, probably ate some incredible food, and came back with what he's calling a landmark deal. The agreement allows up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into Canada at reduced tariff rates. In exchange, China is going to decrease tariffs on Canadian canola and other products. On paper, it sounds like a win-win, right? We get cheaper EVs to help with our climate goals, farmers get better access to Chinese markets, everybody goes home happy. Except Doug Ford is absolutely losing his mind over this, and he's not alone. The question is, are his concerns legitimate or is this just political theater with a side of fear-mongering? Let's start with what Doug Ford actually said, because it's truly something special. The man went on record saying this deal would hurt Canada's auto industry and threaten national security. Then he dropped this absolute gem. Once the camel gets his head in the tent, his whole body is in the tent. I mean, points for the vivid imagery, Doug, but what does that even mean in practical terms? Is China the camel? Are we the tent? Is this a metaphor or did Ford just really want to talk about camels? But wait, it gets better. He then suggested that President Donald Trump wouldn't want Chinese spy vehicles coming across the border. Chinese spy vehicles. Like every electric car from China is basically a four-wheel James Bond gadget waiting to steal our secrets. Now, before we completely dismiss Ford's concerns as political grandstanding, let's acknowledge that he's not entirely wrong to be worried about the auto sector. Ontario's economy is heavily tied to auto manufacturing. We're talking thousands of jobs, billions in economic activity, entire communities built around auto plants. When Ford hears that 49,000 Chinese EVs are coming into the Canadian market at reduced tariffs, he sees competition for Ontario-made vehicles. He sees potential job losses. He sees voters who work in auto plants getting nervous. It's not completely irrational, even if the camel metaphor was a bit much. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is where we need to talk to someone who actually knows what they're talking about instead of just shouting into microphones. Charlotte Yates, who runs the Automotive Policy Research Center and actually studies this stuff for a living, had some fascinating things to say. She wasn't surprised that Carney's China trip resulted in a deal. That makes sense, you don't fly halfway around the world just to have tea and take selfies. But she was surprised by the content of the deal, specifically how much Carney gave up. Her take? I'm not sure that we had any other option. And that right there is the real story everyone's missing while they argue about spy cars and camels. Canada was in a tough spot here, tougher than most people realize. Our relationship with China has been frosty for years. We've had trade disputes, diplomatic tensions, hostage situations, the whole 9 yards. Meanwhile, our farmers, particularly canola farmers, have been getting absolutely hammered by Chinese tariffs. These aren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real people losing real money because their products are being taxed into oblivion when they try to sell to one of the world's biggest markets. Carney needed to do something. The question wasn't whether to make a deal, it was what kind of deal could he actually. So let's talk about what Canada actually got out of this, because it's not nothing. Reduced Chinese tariffs on canola and other agricultural products is huge for Canadian farmers. We're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in increased exports. Canadian agriculture has been getting crushed by protectionist policies around the world, and this deal opens up a massive market. For provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta where canola is a major crop, this is potentially transformative. But you don't hear Doug Ford talking about that, do you? And why would he? Ontario doesn't grow canola. Ontario makes cars. Different province, different priorities, different political calculations. The other thing Canada gets is access to cheaper electric vehicles, which matters more than people think. Canada has ambitious climate goals. We've committed to reducing emissions, transitioning to clean energy, getting more EVs on the road. But here's the problem, EVs are expensive. Like really expensive. The average Canadian can't afford a $60,000 electric car, which means our climate goals become this aspirational thing that only wealthy people can participate in. Bringing in cheaper Chinese EVs, even a limited number of them, helps make the transition to electric vehicles more accessible. It's not perfect, but it's something. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the camel in the tent. Ford's concerns about the auto industry aren't completely baseless. Allowing 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada at reduced tariffs absolutely creates more competition for domestically produced vehicles. That's just math. More options in the market means consumers have more choices, which means Canadian automakers and the plants that build cars here have to compete harder. In a perfect world, competition makes everyone better. In the real world, competition can mean job losses and plant closures, especially if the competition is coming in with a significant price advantage. But here's what Ford isn't telling you. The Canadian auto industry was already facing massive disruption from the EV transition regardless of this China deal. Traditional automakers are scrambling to retool their factories, retrain their workers, and compete with companies like Tesla that were built for electric from day one. The shift to EVs is happening whether we like it or not, whether we make a deal with China or not. The question is whether Canada positions itself to be part of that transition or whether we stick our heads in the sand and pretend we can just keep making gas-powered cars forever. Charlotte Yates pointed out something really important that gets lost in all the shouting. She said Carney went to China looking to make trade-offs, and the fact that he needed to do something suggests Canada didn't have great alternatives. Think about our position for a second. We're caught between the United States, which is becoming increasingly protectionist and unpredictable, and China, which is a massive market but also a geopolitical rival. We need to trade with both, but both countries are making that increasingly difficult. This deal might not be perfect, but what was the alternative? Keep letting our farmers get crushed by Chinese tariffs while we wait for some magical better option to appear. The reality of modern trade politics is that sometimes you're choosing between bad options and less bad options. It's not about finding the perfect deal, it's about making the best deal you can given the circumstances. Carney looked at the situation and decided that getting relief for Canadian farmers and access to cheaper EVs was worth allowing more Chinese electric vehicles into the market. Ford looked at the same situation and decided that protecting Ontario auto jobs was more important than everything else. They're both right about their priorities, which is why this is so messy. Let's talk about the national security angle for a second because Ford really went there with the whole Chinese spy vehicles comment. Is there a legitimate security concern about Chinese technology, including vehicles? Sure. China has been caught multiple times embedding surveillance technology into products, stealing intellectual property, and using commercial relationships for intelligence gathering. That's not conspiracy theory stuff, that's documented fact. But the idea that every Chinese EV is automatically a spy vehicle is, let's be honest, a bit much. It's like saying we can't buy Chinese phones because they might be listening to us, which, okay, maybe they are, but so is every other tech company on the planet. The real security questions around this deal are more subtle. Are we becoming too dependent on China for critical technology? Are we giving them leverage over our economy that they could use against us politically? Are we undermining our own industrial capacity in ways that could hurt us long-term? These are fair questions that deserve serious answers, not sound bites about camels and spy cars. But nuanced policy discussion doesn't make for great headlines, so here we are. What's really fascinating about this whole debate is how it exposes the different interests within Canada. Ford cares about Ontario manufacturing jobs because that's his constituency. Prairie Premiers care about getting better market access for agricultural products because that's their constituency. Carney, as Prime Minister, has to balance all these competing interests while also thinking about national climate goals, international relationships, and economic strategy. It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle, and everyone's yelling at you about which chainsaw you should drop first. The auto industry is understandably nervous. They see 49,000 Chinese EVs as the first wave of competition that could eventually become a flood. They're worried about plant closures, layoffs, and communities built around auto manufacturing becoming economic casualties of trade policy. But farmers who've been struggling with Chinese tariffs for years are probably pretty happy right now. They see this as finally getting some relief after being collateral damage in various diplomatic disputes. Who's right? Both of them. That's what makes this so complicated. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud but everyone's thinking. Canada doesn't have as much leverage in these negotiations as we'd like to believe. We're a mid-sized economy sandwiched between superpowers who are increasingly hostile to each other. We need access to foreign markets because our domestic market isn't big enough to support our industries on its own. But we also need to protect our workers and industries from being completely overwhelmed by foreign competition. Threading that needle gets harder every year, especially as global trade becomes more politicized and less predictable. Carney's deal might not be perfect, but perfect wasn't an option. The question is whether this deal is better than the status quo of farmers getting hammered by Chinese tariffs while we wait for some mythical better opportunity. Yates seems to think Carney didn't have much choice, and she's literally an expert on this stuff. Ford thinks the deal is terrible, and has got legitimate concerns about auto jobs. Can they both be right? In politics, absolutely. So is Mark Carney's China EV deal a disaster or a necessity? Well, if you're an Ontario auto worker, it probably looks like a disaster. If you're a Saskatchewan canola farmer, it probably looks like a necessity. If you're trying to buy an affordable electric car, it might be great news. If you're worried about Chinese influence in Canada, it might keep you up at night. The truth is it's probably all of these things at once, which is deeply unsatisfying but also reality. Trade deals create winners and losers, and pretending otherwise is just dishonest. What we need to watch now is how this actually plays out. Will those 49,000 Chinese EVs flood the market and destroy jobs, or will they fill a niche and help with climate goals? Will the reduced tariffs on Canadian products actually benefit farmers, or will China find other ways to restrict our access? Will this deal strengthen Canada's position or weaken it? We won't know for months, maybe years, but you can bet Doug Ford will keep talking about camels the entire time. If you want to stay on top of this story and every other wild development in Canadian politics, hit that subscribe button and join the Canadian Insights crew. We're pumping out multiple videos daily because this stuff never stops. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Is Carney a genius or did he just make a huge mistake? I want to hear from you. Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, and remember that in Canadian politics, the only thing more complicated than our trade relationships is explaining them at parties. See you in the next one.